Mr. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like permission to insert my printed statement in the record.
Without objection, the full statement of all the witnesses will be.
Along with a statement from the Liberty Study Committee. Unanimous consent to put that in the record as well. I, too, am grateful that you're holding these hearings because I think privacy is a very important issue, and that we are going to hear more and more of it. I think it came to the attention of the public and to many in our regulatory bodies when Know Your Customer regulations were proposed a year or so ago, and with a little bit of encouragement, there were over 500,000 comments sent to the Federal Reserve and the FDIC because these were regulations that were way overstepping and ignoring the privacy of the individual. I take a little different approach to the issue of privacy than others, but I think that there is a common thread among us that the solution is going to be found somewhere in dealing with the Social Security number. And for that reason, I am encouraged. In 1970, we had the Privacy Act, 1974, the Privacy Act was written to combat some of the things the Bank Secrecy Act did in 1970. And the Privacy Act was designed to say you cannot use the Social Security number as an identifier. But then, like so often in our legislation, later on in the bill it said, but Congress can make use of the Social Security number anytime they want. And we certainly have been doing that since then. And I think that is where the serious problem is. But where I disagree with some of my friends who will write more legislation, I think there's a certain part of privacy that should be dealt with in the marketplace. For instance, I don't believe that Congress should write a law compelling the Sierra Club and the ACLU to deal with their memberships and say, have them fill out a form and get permission before they can rent lists or do anything, because the more information they collect, the more likely it is that information will go to the government and then abused by possibly their political enemies. So I'm not in favor of more regulations. For instance, the bank bill that we passed last year said that the bank would have to ask questions about privacy. Again, accumulation of more material. The real problem I see is the Social Security number, the universal identifier. It is true, in the old days, medical privacy was taken care of much better. But now that we have government-mandated health care programs and health management, yes, it's convenient. It's convenient for government to be more efficient. But the question is, do we want to weigh the two? Can you always argue the case for efficient government, at the same time protect privacy? I think there's a conflict there, but our goal should be the privacy. The goal of privacy should override the efficiency of government, and I think that sometimes is where we slip on this. And just providing new rules, I think, can be very, very damaging to us, and that we shouldn't just ask the government or ask these organizations to provide more forms to fill out, because that invites abuse. My bill, H.R. 220, addresses this, and this is where I'm hoping more of us can come together. And it does more or less state what the law in 1974 state, but it has the force of law, that you cannot use the Social Security number as a universal identifier. It wasn't intended. We never even used Social Security numbers on our tax forms till the early 1960s. And there's no reason that we can't pass something like this. If we're concerned about identity theft, the best thing we can do for those who steal identities is to have all our information brought together by the universal identifier. So the most important thing that we could do to stop identity theft is to make sure that there's a law in the books, that we live by it, and that we do not have a universal identifier. It will be this, and is, the Social Security number. It is universal. I delivered babies in my professional life, and it is true, in the last several years we were required. Everybody was getting Social Security numbers before the baby left the hospital. Everybody wants to know everything about everything, and the most important way they accumulate this information and can find out information on us is the Social Security number. So if it makes government a little less efficient, I think that might have to come about. I do not believe you can demand the efficiency that some people would like on government programs, at the same time say that we will protect our privacy. There will have to be a choice. Of course, my choice is for privacy, and my choice, of course, would be to pass H.R. 220, and there could be no universal identifier for any of our programs. And I thank the chairman.
My next question is directed to Mr. Paul. The American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators, they will testify later on that your bill, H.R. 220, will negatively impact on the ability of states to combat fraud and ensure public safety. Would you like to respond to that criticism?
Well, I think the opposite would be true if you're interested in stopping the fraud of identity theft. Since the Social Security number being used as a universal identifier enhances the identity theft, I say we would go a long way to stopping that. I guess what they're referring to is the possibility of putting an ID or the Social Security number on our driver's licenses. And that has been started, and that, of course, is what the individuals who like the national ID card would like. And even though I don't happen to believe it would impede the ability to combat fraud because it would circumvent or stop the identity theft, I would be quite willing to say even if there was the slightest benefit, it's still so dangerous to use a universal identifier that our freedoms and our liberties and our privacies, I mean, if we had armed guards every place, of course, there may be less fraud and less theft, but we would be living in a police state. So there's an extreme there. So this is just the introduction of the heavy hand of government monitoring us. And therefore, even if there can be a slight justification, I don't think it should be accepted. I don't believe that is the case because I think it would be a tremendous benefit to stop the identity theft.
Mr. Markey?
Can I very briefly just say that I do agree with Representative Paul that we have to be very concerned about government misuse of private information within our society. But the big problem today is not Big Brother, it's Big Browser. It's the ability not only for the government, but for private sector companies to gather all this information, which would never have been able to be compiled before. And while some industries say, well, you know, you're going to interfere with this revolution. And I think that's the greatest fear which we all have. Well, who would want to be somebody that's given responsibility for ending the internet revolution? Huh? As though by animating this revolution with old values, you are now going to ruin it. My God, just think if internet stocks had to be valued on the same basis as the old economy stocks. You know, they might go down a couple of thousand points. You know, that'd be terrible if they had to actually have profits, have a cash flow. You can't value stocks that way, they say. You're foolish. You know, are we going to prohibit fraud online? No, that would, under their argument, no, that would actually interfere with their ability to get this thing going. But right now, we have rules that say that you can't transfer, as a tax preparer, somebody's private tax information without their permission. That you can't transfer driver license information without their permission. Because of Judge Bork, it's illegal to transfer any information about any video cassettes which you rent at a video store. Doesn't ruin their business, but it allows you to protect the information about the movies that you rented. No cable company can sell the information about which channels you watch and for how long and what time in the middle of the night you might have flipped to that station. And when watching that movie while everybody was upstairs asleep, they can't sell that information as to what you were watching to anybody. People can't sell your telephone numbers at the phone company, even though it would make a lot of money for them. The cell phone industry can't use their cell phone as a tracker to sell to people as to where you go. That's illegal. Now, again, it limits these industries, but it gives us some additional sense of privacy. And all we're saying about the Social Security number is that it falls into a category which deserves special protection, not only from the government, but also from any industry as well that sees us as nothing more than a product.
If I am reading this panel right, I find Mr. Markey and Mr. Paul agreeing with each other.
When the liberal left and the libertarian right join up, it doesn't leave a lot of room in the middle. to find a compromise. I think we're pretty much in agreement in terms of what has to happen in our country.
Well, we'll have to put this down as a red letter day. Mr. Tanner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank you all of you, for being here. I really believe that this issue is a sleeping giant, that if people really stop to think about the potential ramifications of this problem, they'd be terrified. And it's our job, and I want to thank Chairman Shaw, to not only hold these hearings to educate, but also to try to find the answers, and you all are here to help us do that, and we very, very much appreciate it. I think from listening to you all in the other day, the appeal of the Social Security number is that it portends to give absolute assurance to whomever has asked for it that you're who you say you are. And it's ironic that this very attractive, appealing practice could be the very thing that gets us in trouble with that, and you're not who you say you are. Because we heard a couple of days ago from Colonel Stevens, I don't know if you all who are not on the committee, I know Jerry and Jim were here, this was a heart-wrenching story. This retired lieutenant colonel and his wife have had their identity stolen. They were looking forward to retirement in South Carolina or Florida with their grandchildren and so on, and now they can't leave this area because of recurrent credit problems and because, as far as they know, it may still be unfolding. Now, their lives, if not being ruined physically by ravaging illness, have been altered to the extent that their lifetime dreams of their golden years have become unreachable for them. Not having heard them, but knowing of the circumstances that they and others find themselves in, I'd like to ask Mr. Kleska and Dr. Paul, how does your bill help the situation that Colonel Stevens and his wife testified to? Jerry?
Well, hopefully, Congressman Tanner, the bill would help the next Stevens case, where someone who is trying to steal someone's identity would not be permitted to do so because they won't have access to the Social Security number. So it would help people in that similar situation by making it almost impossible to get one's Social Security number. And I think that's where we have to start with any bill that the Ways and Means Committee deals with. Again, these numbers are disseminated not only through the websites, on the internet. Motor vehicle departments are selling them. The credit bureaus are selling them as part of the header information. And so a person who is out looking for John Tanner's Social Security number can probably with relative ease find it. And what we try to do in my legislation is prohibit the sale, the commercial use of the Social Security number. And if in fact your bank has it, fine, but they can't sell the list, nor do they. But we know the lists are being sold by such concerns like the Motor Vehicle Department. And let me respond add a point to the response from Mr. Paul.
Does your legislation apply to Eddie Bauer and L.L. Bean and those people too?
Apply to who?
L.L. Bean, Eddie Bauer, people I do business with.
Right, but they're not the ones selling it. Usually they might be buying information that could be contained on those lists. But state legislators are also getting the same pressures and hearing the same problems that we are. And as time goes by, less and less number of states are using the Social Security number as your driver's license number. In fact, if I'm correct, I believe Virginia just passed legislation or stopped the use of that being on your driver's license. And so as time goes on, more and more states aren't going to be involved.
If you'll yield, does your bill restrict the usage of the Social Security number by the states and local jurisdictions?
No, it doesn't. I think that's a state responsibility. The bill, my bill provides that they cannot sell that information. So if they sell a driver's license file, they cannot include on there or leave on there the Social Security number.
Dr. Paul?
And of course, I think that's very important that states not use these numbers for the sale of state information. But my bill, I think, would go a long way to stopping this kind of a problem because it says that you can't use the Social Security number for anything other than to identify your Social Security account. So it doesn't deal with the sale so much as it deals with trying to prevent the setup. So when we talk about commercial interests, it's the fact that we have, just like our voting card, I mean, we're lackadaisical about it, we accept it. Same way with corporations. They use it as a convenience. It's convenient for corporations, it's convenience for everybody. And my bill says you can't use it in any other government agency. We can't universalize it and require it. Certainly, we would never be able to write the proposed law that says the states will use the Social Security number and have it universal as a universal ID card.
Am I correct in then stating that your bill deals more with the gathering of the information and Jerry's bill deals more with the dissemination?
I think so.
I think that'd be correct.
Is there a way to bring those two together? Because it seems to me both have appeal.
But I think if you, his problem would be lessened if my bill were passed, in that there would be no accumulation and it would be less likely to have information to sell.
Disseminate. All right.
The problem is that those lists and those numbers are out there, so I think for tomorrow or today, we need his bill. For yesterday, we need mine to stop.
Mr. Hayworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as the bells have rung with votes, I just have a couple of very quick questions. In addition to thanking our colleagues for coming down and offering their opinions on this, I would concur with my colleagues here on the subcommittee. This is an issue of great concern, especially to the people of the 6th District of Arizona. First, to our friend from Wisconsin, Mr. Kleschka, your bill has also been referred to the committees on banking and financial services and also the Committee on the Judiciary. What has been their reaction to your legislation?
I have not checked with the chairman. Naturally, they have not had a hearing up to date. Clearly, there is joint jurisdiction because for banking, we deal with credit bureaus. We do have penalties in my bill. So whatever product this committee comes up with will have to be meshed with those other committees also.
Have you heard anything from either committee about the plan of any action?
No, I have not. The last we heard was on our financial modernization bill. That was the major issue this time around, where 2 years ago it wasn't even debated. That's how important this issue has become in a very short while.
Yes, indeed, I'd concur. Thank you. Now I turn to my friend, Dr. Paul from Texas, talking about jurisdiction being shared. Your bill has also been referred to the Committee on Government Reform. And I'd ask the same question. Have you gotten a reaction from the committee, and has there been any action planned or taken by the Committee on Government Reform?
Well, I think Government Reform, if I'm not mistaken, has some hearings scheduled next week on it.
Good. All right, very good. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
At this point, since Mr. Tanner brought up the name of Colonel Stevens, we did ask, and the representation had been made that that this was in some way some requirement in law for the Social Security number at the base commissaries. We made an inquiry to the Pentagon, and I'd like to read into the record the answer that we got. The answer says that the Department of Defense directives governing commissaries and exchange do not require that the Social Security numbers be used for check cashing purposes. So something has been misrepresented. The commissary and exchange services have adopted operating procedures that use the Social Security number for checking cashing verification, since it identifies the authorized patron. The military ID uses a Social Security number as the service number, and that we determined yesterday by just looking at Mr. Johnson's card. We may want to do some more inquiring into that particular area. I have been advised that we have 3 votes on the floor. This panel would be dismissed, and I thank you for each one of you gave some very fine testimony, and I find myself in agreement with just about everything that has been said. We will recess until the conclusion of that vote, and then we will return to hear our second panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. Thank you.
Cool.